Hi everyone, hope you've had a lovely Yom Tov. You're enjoying Sukkot. I know it looks exactly like I'm in a desert on a starry night, but I'm actually just sitting in my sukkah with my very cool desert scene wall hanging behind me. So this week there's lots of things coming to an end. It's the final bit of this whole mad month of Yomim Tovim. We've had Rosh Hashanah, we've had Yom Kippur, and finally we're getting to the end of Sukkot. We're also getting to the end of the whole Torah, because on Simchas Torah we've complete the cycle of reading all of the Torah, and we have our final parsha, V'zos Ha'Bracha. And in V'zos Ha'Bracha, we have the final moments of Moshe Rabbeinu's life. So he is coming to an end as well. And I often think that actually the Torah, if you think about it from the book of Shemos onwards, is almost like an autobiography, because Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it all down, and it's really the story of his life. He's born in Shemos. We hear about him even from conception, and then his birth, and then all of his life experiences. We're really told the story of the Jewish people through the eyes of Moshe from his birth until his death here in the final parsha. And V'zos Ha'Bracha starts with him giving his final blessings to all of the 12 Shabbotim. And when he finishes, Hashem says to him, now I'm taking you up the mountain. And from the top of the mountain, you're going to see this land of Eretz Israel, of Israel, that I promised to Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov. And in the Pasuk explaining that, it uses the word lamer, saying. And whenever we have this word, it means saying to convey to somebody else. It's not just Hashem talking to Moshe, it's Hashem talking to Moshe to say it to somebody else. So who else is he going to say this to? So the Ar HaChaim explains that actually Hashem wants Moshe to see the land from afar, even though he's not allowed in it. Why? Because he wants Moshe to go up after he's no longer with us, once he's died. He'll go up and tell Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov that this land that has been promised to them has finally, is just about to be going into the hands of the Jewish people as Hashem promised them. Now, why can't Hashem tell Avram, Yitzchak and Yaakov, you know what, I'm keeping my promise, I told you I was going to get them there, and now look, they're finally going in, they're just on the border. Why does Hashem need Moshe to tell Avram, Yitzchak and Yaakov that this is happening, that he's keeping his promise to them? So the Ar HaChaim suggests a really interesting answer. He says maybe Hashem actually wants Avram, Yitzchak and Yaakov to hear the story from Moshe's point of view, of everything that's happened to get them to this point, why it's taken so much time, all the troubles they had on the way, everything that happened to them, all the experiences that got them to this point, many hundreds of years later, after it was promised to Avram that it was going to happen, they're finally going in. And it's interesting because it makes you think, Avram was made this promise and that his children were going to inherit the land, and he gets to the end of his life and it hasn't happened. And then Yitzchak's made the same promise that his children are going to inherit the land, and he gets to the end of his life, and again, it still hasn't happened. And finally, we get to Yaakov, he's made the same promise, and again, it hasn't happened in his lifetime. So it finally happens towards the end of Moshe's lifetime, or it's just about to happen at the end of his lifetime. And he's supposed to go up to Shemayim, to heaven, and tell them this is finally happening. This thing that you were promised, that you were waiting for, that never happened in your lifetime, it really is coming true. And I think it teaches us something about endings, because, Avram thinks the end of his life, that's the end. It hasn't happened. And that's it, I'm done. And Yitzchak thinks this is the end of my life and it hasn't happened, and that's it. And Yaakov as well, he thinks, this is the end of my life and I'm done. And actually, this pasuk is teaching us something amazing, because firstly, it tells us that there are conversations going on in Shemayim. That Avram, Yitzchak and Yaakov, who've been long dead, they're all going to be sitting around having a schmooze, having a discussion with Moshe Rabbeinu that, life carries on. Life as we know it isn't just life down here. There's life up there, and there's things going on that you can't even imagine. When, somebody dies and you never see them again, you kind of feel like that's it. But actually, what's the end of life is also the beginning of something new. It's a life that we don't understand and none of us have yet experienced, but there is something new. It's the beginning of something as well. And the Pesukim carry on. As soon as Moshe dies, it straight away starts talking about Yeshua's leadership, about how he inherited this sense of wisdom and that he was able to continue to be the next leader. Because you can imagine all the people are mourning. It's the end of an era. This is the end of Moshe Rabbeinu's life, and he's the only leader they've ever known. And they must feel really down and depressed, like what's going to happen next? But straight away, there's a new leader. It's not just the end, it's also a new beginning. And when we get to Simchas Torah, it feels like a bit of a downer sometimes. It could feel like a downer because you've had all this amazing time with your friends and your family celebrating Yom Tov together, and then you kind of have to get back to real life and go back to work and go back to school or university or whatever it is, and you've had all these nice days off and you could feel a bit down. But actually Simchas Torah is the day of our greatest celebration because it's the day that we finish reading the Torah, the final parsha, V'zos Ha'Bracha, but also we start again. We start laning the whole cycle again from Parshas Bereshis, because whenever you end something, it might feel like an end. You know, when you get to the end of a good book and you're a bit depressed. But the amazing thing about Torah is that it doesn't end. You finish one parsha, the last parsha in the whole book, and then you start reading it again. And I think the fact that it's told through the eyes of Moshe as like a personal account almost, it teaches us it's supposed to be a very personal thing, because each time you read it, each year the cycle starts again. It's going to say something completely different to you each time. You're going to be a year older, a year wiser. You're going to have a whole extra year's worth of experiences. And this Torah is supposed to talk to you through all of those things, and it's going to say something different every time you read it. So even if you've read it again in the past, you have to keep reading it. You can't just stop at the end and that's it, you're done, like a good book. You keep going back to the beginning again, reading it all through again. So this year, my challenge to you is, if you haven't followed the parasha every year, or even if you have, make sure that you find time in your week to pick up something from the parasha, because it's so rich and there's so many layers to it and so many messages, and it will always talk to you. Whatever you're going through that week, it will definitely have something to say in the parasha, something relevant, something meaningful, something that can genuinely make a difference to your day-to-day life, even though it was written thousands of years ago. It's just, there's so much in it, so much depth, so much understanding of the human side of things, of human emotion, about relationships, especially this book that we're about to start, back at the beginning of creation, of birth, of the beginning of our nation, of all that family history of Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov and their wives and their children and all of those human interactions. There's so much there that you can delve into that will really talk to you. So even if you haven't been following it, or even if you have been following it, find time in your week either to read it through in English if it's easier, or to find a particular share that you enjoy listening to online, or a 5-minute thing, or just even a summary, just to know what's going on in the weekly Sedra, because it makes such a difference to your week, just having that continuous cycle and injecting that Torah into your weekly life. Have a good Yom Tov and a good Shabbos.